Why is this day still so pivotal in world history and for people today, even over 100 years on?
Because the First World War was the moment when family history and global history crossed, and they've never been separated since. The First World War was a catastrophe for French families, as it was for families all over the world. 1,400,000 soldiers died in the First World War, and every one of them was a member of a French family. You can see that in war memorials all over the country. And about half of them had no known graves. They were blown to pieces, to smithereens by artillery fire. As a result of that, the mourning process for those men who died still goes on because they no longer exist. War was transformed from being a killing machine into a disappearing act. And it's the disappearance of these men which makes 11th of November so poignant.
And this disappearance symbolized by the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which we have here in Paris, in France, under the Arc de Triomphe. Tell us a bit more about the importance of that.
Well, there were names without bodies on the war memorials all over France, and there were bodies without names that could not be identified. And both of them symbolized the tearing apart of family life in the course of the First World War, which was the worst military disaster to that point. The Second World War was still more disastrous. But it was a moment when the concept of war changed radically. Mass death transformed war. It made it everyone's business. Every family had some friend or loved one who had disappeared in the course of the war. And that radically changed the notion of what war is.
There's a very important word here in France. I don't know if a lot of our viewers know. It's poilu. Tell us a bit more about that word and the importance of it and what it means.
It was very different from the British. Poilu means a hairy one, and it's the fact that the French men wouldn't shave in the trenches with cold water and rusty razors. It is a brotherhood of the trenches, of men who fought for France, but fought for each other. And that love between men is what gave them the courage to move forward under circumstances that we can almost not imagine today, how difficult it was. The number of men who died for their brothers is as important as the number of men who died for France.
And we just saw a moment ago, the French President Emmanuel Macron, who's very young, still in his 40s. Obviously, this is still very important to him to continue this history and this remembrance. Do you think average young people in France and around the world still recognize the importance of World War I?
I think in France they certainly do, and now even more so in Germany and Eastern Europe, because in order to understand the integration of Europe today, you have to understand the disintegration of Europe in 1914. That's what the First World War was.
Indeed. And today, President Macron is going to be honoring a World War II hero because, as I was mentioning earlier, over the years, Remembrance Day has turned into a remembrance of all those who have died for the country. This man is named Hubert Germain. He was a compagnon pour la libération, or as we say, a resistant. Tell us a bit more, for those who might not know, the history of the resistance and why they are so important.
Well, in these post-Brexit days, it's difficult to recognize that the French resistance was born in London. It was born not only because of the presence there of Charles de Gaulle, but of men of many different kinds who came to France from Britain, came to Britain from France at the very last minute in order to fight. And one of them is going to be buried in Mont Valérien today by the president. And his sacrifice in the Second World War was also personal. His father sided with Pétain. The family was never put together again. This radical fracture of France in the Second World War is represented today. The radical fracture of the First World War was the loss of loved ones. The radical fracture of the Second World War is resistance and collaboration.
And you mentioned Mont Valérien. That's a place where many French resistants were brutally executed. That's since become a memorial.
Yes, it's just outside of Paris. It's in a forest. It was built by Thiers, and it has the quiet that the Nazis wanted to execute over 1,000 men. And the last compagnon de la libération, the person symbolizing the courage of France in the Second World War, will be the very last one of those who finds his eternal rest there.